About Eugene Ostashevsky's poem The Pirate Who Does Not Know the Value of Pi, which was published this year. Um, well, one of my first impressions was that it's easy to read. You don't need to use Ezra Pound's theory or any other critic's theories to actually understand the poem or enjoy it, which is, I think, great. This poem is dialogical. These two characters, the pirate and the parrot, talk constantly about philosophical matters, and they reflect on literature, on language. And it's very interesting. It's very easy to read. It's because of the form. It's because of it's dialogical, and because there's this great sense of humor in it. Many times related to philosophical matters or things related to language, but also there's this sense of humor that's not really intended to be intellectual. And through these humoristic phrases, it also connects on a different level with the reader, and that's how it creates empathy with its reader. And I noticed it also uses humor to disguise the seriousness of the topics that these two characters discuss, and it makes it easy to read. There on page 13, the pirate says, "I often think about the relationship of experience to language," and I think this is something that reflects that these two characters reflect upon throughout the poem. And something that I loved about this poem is that it constantly breaks the fourth wall, creating a different relationship between the poem and the reader. It presents a lot of philosophical intertextualities, and I also realized that the form of the poem is not traditional. I mean, sometimes it is. It's just, paragraphs but it sometimes plays with the space disposition, and it's interesting, but I don't think it's that relevant, like with the concretes, for example. I also realized that there's sometimes rhyme. It plays with the typography and font size. It separates the page. Sometimes one half belongs to the pirate and the other half belongs to the parrot. I found several examples of metatextuality, reflections on language, and philosophical intertextualities. One example of metatextuality is the following, and I quote, "Will we exist when this book is over?" he suddenly asked. "If it's a good book," said the parrot. And then about reflections on language, I have some quotes. "What does it mean, this my talking to you? Do you really hear me? I mean, hear me, hear me." This is on page 20. And then, "Clouds we wish to be mute like you. There's so much error in language. How to articulate, for example, our emotions, cut up and classify their continuum." And then this one. "Phew," said the parrot. "What did you say?" said the pirate. "I did not say, I sneezed," said the parrot. "Bless you then," said the pirate. "But in English, when we sneeze, we say, achoo." "When I sneeze, I am not speaking English," said the parrot. "Not everything is language," thought the pirate. And then there's a sad phase on page 70, which has to do, I believe, with modern texting and, interacting and communicating throughout symbols. And then the pirate and the parrot talk about being on a deserted island, and the parrot says, I don't know any of the precise terms for the things we see here, and that's relaxing. The presence of nature, I mean, even when not elucidated by language." And then the parrot asks the pirate, "How do the grammatical structures of your language affect your experience of it?" And I think this is the main premise. And then the parrot says, "Is it repetition that makes poetry poetry?" proposed the parrot. And I think the parrot plays with the concept of literature, poetry, and our relationship with language, and the relationship between experience and language. And then regarding philosophical intertextualities, there are a lot, especially with Wittgenstein, and I quote, "But the limits of his language are the limits of his world. Who is the author of this statement?" On page 13, and he's quoting Wittgenstein when he says, the limits of my language mean the limits of my world." And then he says, "It's so strange to encounter something in life that earlier you knew only in representation," said the parrot. "It makes you question things." And that's what they do. They question themselves about many things. And about the form, the dialogical form in which it's written gives it a certain rhythm that makes it easy to read. And then I asked myself, what is the objective of using metatextuality or breaking the fourth wall? When the illusion of fiction is broken by the character when he addresses the reader directly. And I thought that maybe the objective of breaking this fourth wall is to connect in a different level with the reader. I noticed that humor is used to mask the seriousness of things he's asking. The author asks the reader without making him feel uncomfortable. And I think this poem is intended to be a dialogue between itself and the reader. And this is, you can see this in the next quote. "I need to restructure my soul so that it is better able to interact with the outside world without opening itself up to be hurt by it," says the parrot. On page 84. And this seems to be what he does. My soul refers to the author, in my interpretation, and the outside world refers to the reader. So he masks what he says through the use of humoristic phrases. About this humor, I have some quotes. For example, "I beg your pardon, I'm an emancipated parrot." And then, "You're interrupting me," says the parrot. "I was composing a poem." "I'm sorry," says the parrot who does not know the value of pi. "It's just that here we are shipwrecked on a deserted island and I get a telegram and I can't even read it. It's so frustrating." "Let me see," says the parrot. No, it doesn't look like a logically discursive utterance." The pirate who does not know the value of pi crumples the telegram and throws it into the water. "Don't litter," says the parrot. "Where do you think you are? Literature?" So I think this is a great humoristic phrase, and it also breaks, this fourth wall. Another quote, "Things might have turned out so much easier had we attended pirate and parrot therapy before being shipwrecked." "Oh, don't start that again." And then the narrator explains some things before the pirate was a pirate, and then he says the parrot was already a parrot. And so this is an example of how humor isn't always related to something highly intellectual, but it's still very important because of the empathy it creates with its reader. And I think the best way you can approach contemporary poetry, at least this one in particular, is by asking yourself about your relationship with language and how you express experience, or what is experience to you, and just think about these concepts.